Hello, everyone. Today we are here with Mamie Kanfer Stewart. She is the author of, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, I'm losing my connection here. Hold on, everyone, technical difficulties. As I, of course, get going, I have to have some type of issue. It wouldn't be a normal day if that didn't happen. All right. See. Hold on one second. I'm going to try to change a connection here, and I'm going to see if I can get that going. I apologize, everyone. I hope that you're all able to hear me okay. Let's see.
Yeah, we can actually hear you fine. At least I can.
Okay. Let's see. I'm going to change a setting really quick. It was like it's kind of echoing or something. I'm not. Are you getting any feedback on your end?
I am not.
Okay. I think we're good. Okay, we'll start over. Hey, everyone. We are here with Mamie Kanfer Stewart. She is the author of Momentum, and I would consider her like a meeting expert would be a great way to say it. And so we're going to talk today about how to have meetings that are more productive, and oftentimes that means not having a meeting at all. And so we're going to go through these, everything with her, and she's going to talk you guys through how to make your business more productive through having more productive and more efficient meetings. So here's a little bit of background on Mamie. So if you guys want to end up checking out her website, I will provide a link at the end. And I'd highly suggest, maybe checking out her book. It's full of awesome information that goes into a lot more detail than we'll be able to get into today. And Mamie, would you like to say anything or start off with with a little bit of introduction about yourself? Maybe give people a little bit more of a background.
Sure. So as a quick background, I have been focused on meetings for about 5-ish years so far. I started my business Meteor at the time and was looking at collaboration. We actually started as a software business and quickly became, I shouldn't say quickly, but after a couple of years in the software world, focused on a software to help people have productive meetings. We realized that software is great, but so much of meetings is about the people and the interactions that you have and how you behave around meetings, whether it's before a meeting, during a meeting, or after a meeting. And so we said goodbye to our software, and we focus now 100% on training people and teaching people and coaching people and teams, kind of individually and as teams, on how to have productive meetings, because it's such a huge part of our day. For many of us, we attend multiple meetings in a day. And if you're, quote, one of the lucky few who doesn't have to go to a lot of meetings, you for sure want those few meetings you do go to be really great. So we focus on the behaviors around that. That's what Meteor does, and that's what I wrote my book about called Momentum. So as Bo said, there's a lot more information in there you can check out, and we're going to touch on some of the key topics today in the webinar. And if you're a podcast listener, I just got to give my podcast a shout out. It's called The Modern Manager. And in it, I kind of alternate between doing solo episodes where I will talk about different practices managers can do to be really great managers and have a really strong, healthy, high-performing team. And then I alternate those with episodes with guests, because I am definitely a meeting expert, but I'm still learning as well. And there's so many wonderful people who can talk about the research they've done, the books they've written, or the experiences that they've had when it comes to effective management. So that's a little bit about me. And I guess last thing I'll say, because I know you guys, some of you are in Kansas, is that I went to school at the Kansas City Art Institute. So that is in Missouri, but I did spend a decent amount of time in the Overland Park on the Kansas side. So shout out to Kansas.
Thank you so much. That gives definitely a good perspective from where you're coming from. So yeah, I'm really excited. I think we're going to learn a lot today. So we'll just jump right in. And my first question I have is pretty broad, but what makes a successful meeting?
Great question. I wonder how many people actually thought about this question ever in the course of their life. So, if you haven't thought about this question, This is a good question for you each to ask yourselves, but I will say from my perspective, there are a few different things that go into making a meeting successful. The first and probably the most important is that the meeting accomplishes whatever it set out to do, which means you actually need to know what you want to accomplish in the meeting, because if you don't know what you want to accomplish, it's really hard to measure whether or not you achieved it. So the first thing is that you need to know why you're having that meeting, and then it will be successful if you achieve that outcome. So if the meeting's to make a decision, the meeting was a success if you made a decision. If the meeting was to create a work plan and get alignment on all of the tasks that have to happen, then the meeting was successful if you produced that plan and you all are clear on what those next steps are. So that's definitely the first piece, and again, the most important is that you accomplish what you set out to do. The other kind of piece of this is around the human side. The meeting will be successful or feel successful if people were engaged. If they walk out of that room feeling good about the conversation, feeling like they had a chance to contribute, feeling like the meeting was worthwhile and a good use of their time, being clear about what's coming next. There's nothing worse than walking out of a meeting and feeling like you wasted an hour of your life and you have no idea what you're supposed to do now because there was no clear next steps, and you're kind of like, why did I do that? Why did I even go to this meeting? Or I had so much to say and nobody wanted to hear, nobody gave me a chance. They just, there was no opportunity for me to weigh in with just one person talking over everybody the whole time. So in addition to accomplishing something, meeting successful if people feel engaged and they walk out of the room feeling energized, feeling it was a good use of their time, and knowing what they should do next. So I'd say those are the two big components to a successful meeting.
Yeah, I totally agree. I know a lot of times we get called to meetings and there's like a general topic, but there's no actual, they haven't really identified what it is that they want to achieve in that meeting. It's like, here's the topic of the meeting, but that's all we know. And then it's, kind of all over the place. And that seems like very typical in my experience of what happens sometimes.
Yes. And there's a clear difference between saying, we're going to have a meeting on the budget, or we're going to have a check-in on this project. And you're like, okay, so what does that mean? We're going to have a check-in on this project. Does that mean I need to prepare and have kind of an up-to-date list of all of the open items and all the challenges and all things? Does that mean I'm just supposed to walk into the room and be ready to discuss what's going on? I have no idea what I'm supposed to do to prepare. I have no idea at the end of that conversation, was it worthwhile? Yeah, we had a conversation, but so what? That's actually something I hear a lot of people say too, is they'll walk out of a meeting and say, that was a really good conversation. And then nothing happens. Nothing changes. No decisions were made. No next steps were identified. And it's almost like if the tree falls in the forest and no one's here to hear it, no one's there to hear it, does it still make a sound? Is a good discussion itself, a productive meeting? Maybe if that's what you're going for, maybe you just needed to get some ideas out and you just needed to connect with people, then sure, a good discussion can be a successful meeting. But if everybody's walking out saying that was a great discussion and then nothing happens and nothing changes, you should revisit whether or not that was really such a good discussion and if it really was a successful conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that gets into just setting your goals. And so whoever is calling that meeting needs to set their expectations, because sometimes when you leave a meeting and maybe his intention was only to brainstorm, then everyone leaves it real confused because they're like, well, we didn't actually figure anything out, or he's not listening to my input because he didn't, he didn't clarify that he was just wanting some input, but he would make the ultimate decision, or she would make the decision. So I think that's sometimes kind of funny to witness people getting really confused because the expectations weren't defined.
Absolutely. There's a comic in our book that we had an artist draw that shows kind of the stages of a meeting, and what happens is kind of the meeting leader has this grand vision, whether that they want to accomplish, whether they've articulated it or not. Kind of, it's in your head. I know what I mean when I say we're having a check-in, or I know what I mean when I say that we're gonna get aligned on this topic, or we're gonna discuss the budget, or we're gonna review last quarter's results, right? People who are planning meetings tend to know what they mean by those things, and they tend to have some expectations set. But if they don't clearly articulate that to everybody else, if they don't say, well, what I mean by we're going to review the project update, or we're going to look at last quarter's, progress, then the people who are coming in, they have totally different expectations. And you get a lot of complaints and a lot of frustration when you have different expectations. So being really clear as the meeting leader, we call it the desired outcome. Set a desired outcome for the meeting. What is it that you want this meeting to achieve? And it's really important that that's a noun and not a verb. So it's much easier to say, we're going to make a decision. We're going to discuss this content. We're going to review this material. We're going to, whatever that kind of verb might be. We're going to brainstorm. And instead, focus on the noun. What's that result? What's the meeting going to accomplish? So we will have a decision. The decision is the noun. We'll have a list of ideas or a list of questions. We'll have a plan of next steps. We'll have clarity on this particular topic. And when you focus on that noun, it's much easier to then say, was this meeting successful? If we have a decision, the meeting was successful. If we didn't make a decision, then we didn't accomplish our desired outcome. If we have a list of 10 ideas, then this meeting was a successful brainstorm. If we only have a list of, if we have a list of 100 ideas, maybe that's actually not what we wanted. Maybe we only wanted to get 10 ideas that are worth exploring and taking to the next step. Or maybe we wanted to get to one idea. And so it was a combination of a brainstorm, but really it's a decision-making meeting because you're doing some thinking, you're generating some ideas, but at the end, it's only going to be successful if you've decided on the one idea to go forward with. So being really clear, that desired outcome, what do you want to have at the end of the meeting? And then sharing that, if you're the meeting leader, sharing that with the other people so they walk in knowing we are going to make a decision or we're not going to make a decision today. We're going to brainstorm and we're going to get down to 10 ideas, or we're going to brainstorm and it's the more the merrier. Or we're going to work on a plan and we're going to have clarity on next steps, but we're only going to do it for the next 3 months. We're not planning out the entire year. The more specific you can be as the meeting leader, the easier it is for everyone else who's coming in to engage in that content and feel like it's a productive meeting because they know what they're there to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that one of the things that it's a common trend that pops up in any part of employee engagement or managing your team is just to be clarifying your intent all the time, and you can't overdo it. You can't over communicate. And so just like that in the meeting, you can send an email or whatever you suggest, discussing what you're going to go over the meeting, but that doesn't mean then before the meeting begins, you should still take a few minutes to go over again, what is the purpose of this and what are we doing? And it never hurts, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. You can't over communicate in that way.
Absolutely. And I think later on we'll talk more about some of the practices you can use during a meeting, but one of them for sure is to start your meeting by saying, this is what we're here to do today. We are going to accomplish, we're going to make a decision, we're going to brainstorm and come up with a list of 5 ideas. We're going to create a plan for the next 3 months with all the key activities. We're going to allocate resources, whatever that thing is that you're going to do and get to that desired outcome. Start your meeting with that. Because what happens is, one, if you go to a lot of meetings, you might be running from meeting to meeting and your brain is like, all over the place, right? Like if you're in a meeting heavy company, or if you're a meeting heavy person and your schedule's really full like that, I know there are some times where I walk into a meeting and I'm literally like, what room am I in? Or I'm calling into an online meeting and I'm like, what is this for? And I'm looking at my calendar, I'm trying to figure out, yeah, like what is this topic? What are we supposed to be doing here? So you need to get people potted. And the other thing that happens is if you don't go to a lot of meetings, maybe it's a little bit easier for you to be like, oh, I have one meeting on my calendar this week. I know what it's for. But the other thing that happens is that just we're in our work. So if you have to shift gears, no matter whether you're coming from another meeting or you're coming from the work that you're doing day in and day out, you have to shift gears and you need to get present. And that transition takes time. And it's easier when the meeting leader starts the meeting with, this is why we're here. Let's all get focused. Let's all get clear. This is what we're here to do today. And this is how we're going to know we're successful. And that also then helps everyone drive towards that outcome. If you start your meeting by just jumping right into the content, you might wander all over the place because you haven't potted people. You haven't given them that anchor to know that you're driving in that direction.
Yeah, it can become so unorganized. So I'm going to jump here to our next question. Let's see if it'll go. Yes, and this is, How do you know whether or not a meeting is needed? I think this one can be huge because people a lot of times there's some people that want to have meetings for everything or
Yeah.
never have meetings, and so it'd be really interesting to hear from somebody who studies this all the time. When is a good time to have a meeting?
Yeah, so we also in our book have a little flow chart that kind of helps you walk through whether or not a meeting is the right next step for the situation that you're in. So a couple of the pieces on that flow chart we'll talk about. So the first is you need to know what you want to accomplish. If you don't know what you want to accomplish, you should not be holding a meeting to figure out what you want that meeting to be about. So if you're just feeling stuck with something and you know you need to kind of talk it through or figure it out, a meeting is probably not the best thing to do. Now, I should say a meeting can be a couple of different things. You can have really formal meetings where you have an agenda set out in advance and you've got that desired outcome and everybody knows and everyone shows up 3 days later to go do that meeting. Or a meeting can be informal, where you pick up the phone and you call a colleague or you walk over to their desk. We consider those to be meetings also. Now, if you're not sure what you need, going and interrupting someone and talk to them may not be the best thing to do. And it can be hard, especially for people who are extroverts who want to talk something out and they're feeling like they just need to bounce off some ideas. They need to just kind of talk it through. It's really easy. I actually have had experiences where I've done this to other people also, where like I'll call someone up and I'll say, hey, I need to talk this through with you for a minute. I need some help with it. And then I'll start talking. And then by the time I'm finished explaining the situation, I know what I have the clarity that I needed. And they're like, so what did you need me for? And I'm like, oh, I guess I didn't actually need you. I just needed to talk it out. So step one, especially if your inclination is to go grab someone or go get help, sit back for a second and try and talk yourself through it internally. Figure out what is it that you really need. Now, once you know what you really need, the next question is, do you need other people to help you accomplish it? So if you need to make a decision, great. Some decisions we can make on our own. Some decisions we need to make with other people. To figure out if other people are important to moving to that next step, right? Do you need their input? Do you need them to consult on something? Do you need information from them? So figure out what you need. The third piece, let's say you have now decided, you know what you need a few other people to get it, you know exactly who those people are. The next thing is this complicated? Is there a reason that the other people need to be interacting real time together? Is this something that requires multi back and forth kind of discussion? So for example, if you have some content that you want feedback on, let's say that you wrote a report and you want people's input on the report. You don't need multiple people sitting in a room together to go through that material. Actually, if you've ever tried it, it's painful. I've sat through meetings, and apologies to any marketers who are on the phone, but I've sat through meetings where, for example, a marketing team or an agency will say, here's what we came up with, let's talk through it. And they show it to us. And then 20 minutes in, we're still on the first slide because we're all we're all giving input onto this slide and, this graphic and this color or this thing and that thing. And it just takes forever to get to the end of the material because everyone's just throwing information out at the report or the slides or whatever it is that you're going over. And there really is not a lot of engagement between the people. It doesn't really matter what somebody else says. It doesn't matter what Julie says. I'm thinking my own thing and I have my own opinion to share about the content of the report or the way it's formatted or the graphics that were used. So many times we don't need a meeting to look at content like that. What we need is input from lots of individuals. We don't need that real-time interaction. And then the last step of it is how are you going to have that meeting? So now you know what you need. I need input on this material, right? You know that you need who you need, which people, and you know that it's important for them to interact with each other, for it to be real time. Because it's not fun. Like you've all seen those email chains, right? Where it kind of goes back and forth, and you're just like, oh my gosh.
Everyone's replying all, and you're like, please stop.
Right. You're like, can we just get in a room together? Then we can hammer this out and be done. Right. That's the situation where you're like, okay, it's time for a meeting. We've taken this as far as we can by email. It's now confusing people and there's a lot of back and forth and there's 20 different points being made. That's when you have the meeting. And then the question is now, we're going to have a meeting. What's the best kind of meeting to have? How long should it be? When should it be? What materials do we need, et cetera? So you've kind of worked yourself up to the point of saying, yep, a meeting is needed. Now we can jump into planning the meeting.
Yeah, that's huge. I think I laugh at that, what you were saying about the email chain, because that happens all the time at my work, and it confuses people to no end.
Yes, yes. There are great uses of email, and there are great uses of the phone, and there are great uses for online meetings and great uses for in-person meetings and great uses for things like Google Docs or Envision app or other online collaboration tools. They all do something really, really well. And the art and the science of it is to know which collaboration method is the most appropriate for what I need. Is sending messages on Slack or on Microsoft Teams the best way to get what I need done? Or is having a meeting or is sending a piece of material? Right? They're all just different ways of collaboration. A meeting is just a form of collaboration, just like an email is a form of collaboration. So knowing which tool to use is where the magic comes in.
Yeah, that's huge. Technology has really made things pretty easy for us when it comes to collaborating. I work on a team of people from all over the world. You know, we have people in India and Africa, and so we use Google Docs all the time. We live edit our agendas during meetings, and it works out really well.
Yes, that's awesome.
So my next question is one that I'm really interested in your input here. And what's the right way to decline a meeting? Because I know that you have some really interesting tips and thoughts on this. So.
Yeah. Yes. So I'm going to talk about how to decline a meeting, but I want to first talk about how to invite people to the right meeting. So in an ideal world, you don't have to decline meetings because the person who's doing the inviting is inviting you for a specific reason to a meeting with a specific outcome. So that's the first step in declining meetings, is helping people who are planning meetings to make sure that they're being thoughtful about who they invite, because there's lots of reasons why we invite the wrong people. We invite the wrong people because we're not being cognizant of who we don't think about like, oh, do I really need the whole team or do I just need these 2 people, right? We're just used to inviting everybody. Or maybe you don't want to make people feel bad by leaving them out. And if that's the case, then you can also invite people as optional. You can say, these are the 3 people I need to have in this meeting, and these are the 2 people who are optional. They can come if they want, but they don't have to. And letting them know it's your choice. If you think this is a good use of your time, if you're interested in this conversation, if you have the capacity in your schedule, you can show up. And if you don't, no pressure, no worries. Like, you don't have to come. The second, and I kind of related to this, is that there's 3 different ways to engage people in a meeting. And so when you're declining a meeting, this is one of the models you can kind of use when you're thinking about it. The first is, who needs to be consulted about the content? So sometimes you want to decline a meeting because you're looking at the agenda or the plan and you're thinking, this is not really relevant for me. And so you don't need to be in the meeting, but maybe you have some information you want to share ahead of time. So those are people who should just be consulted about the meeting content, but don't need to be in the meeting. Then of course, there's people in the meeting, and then there's people who need to be informed of the meeting outcomes. So maybe you're declining a meeting because you're thinking, I don't need to be in that meeting, but I do need to know what happens out of that meeting. I do need to know what next steps are planned or what decisions are made. But I don't really need to be there in the decision-making meeting. I just need to know what's going on afterwards. So, all right, take a step back now. We'll go back to the last question, which is, how do you decline? So you get invited to a meeting. The first question you ask yourself is, do I know what this meeting needs to accomplish? And if you're not clear, then you need to ask. So you can ask in a couple different ways. You can ask by saying, hey, meeting leader, in an email or a phone call or however you communicate with them. Hey, meeting leader, I saw that you invited me to X meeting. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that meeting is going to accomplish? And maybe also, and why you specifically have invited me, what value you want me to bring, what perspective you want me to represent, what information you're hoping I'll share. So what's the meeting going to accomplish? And why have you specifically invited me? Sometimes the meeting leader will be like, oh, that's a really good question. And then they'll have to figure out, and then they'll give you an answer. The other way is if you think maybe you know what the meeting's about, but you're not sure, or you feel like if you take that first approach, the meeting leader is just gonna like be totally turned off and you're just not comfortable being kind of so confrontational. As some people have told me, it feels confrontational to ask a meeting leader what the meeting's about. The other approach you can take is to offer up an what you think the meeting is, and then say, I'm checking for understanding. Hey, I saw you invited me to that project check-in meeting next week. I just want to make sure I understand the plan for that meeting is to review the current project plan and clarify any adjustments for the next quarter, whatever it is. And then the meeting leader can say, oh yes, that's what I meant. Yep, that's it. Good, you got it. Or they'll say, no, actually what I meant was something else. So first thing is, if you don't know what the meeting's about, you gotta find out what the meeting's about. Then you can figure out if you need to be in the meeting. And so you can decline the meeting if you feel like it's not a good use of your time, that there's no real reason why you should be there. Or if you have so much on your plate and you just don't have the capacity to do another meeting. It's funny, it's okay to decline the meeting, like if you're out of the office or if you're double scheduled already, right? Then people say, oh, it's okay, you can decline without even having to say anything. But if your schedule's open, then of course, why would you decline a meeting? But just not the case. Sometimes we have other work and other priorities that are actually more important than that meeting. So depending on who invites you, if you know you want to decline, you can go to the team leader or go to your boss and say, hey, I know that I was invited to this meeting. I know it's probably, it's important work to get done. I'm feeling really overloaded right now. And I know I have these 3 other projects I'm working on. Can you help me figure out which is the most important thing? Like, is this meeting the most important, or is getting this done by this deadline the most important? And sometimes that person will help you figure out, no, actually the meeting is really important, and we can push the deadline off on, finishing and finalizing that report or getting that information pulled together for this other event or whatever it might be. Or they'll look at your workload and say, you're right, that meeting's not the most important thing, go ahead and decline it. Another aspect to declining a meeting is offering to engage in different ways. So maybe you've declined the meeting because you're thinking, this is important, but I don't need to be in that meeting. Maybe I have some information I want to share, but I'm not part of the decision, or I don't really like brainstorming. It's not my strength. I don't really want to sit through an hour-long brainstorming meeting. I have so many other things I could be doing. And if that's the case, you want to offer to the meeting leader, what are other ways you can contribute? So maybe you're saying to them something like, I saw that you invited me to this brainstorming meeting on this topic. It sounds really interesting. I've got a lot of things going on my plate right now, but so I'm not going to be able to attend the meeting, but I do want to weigh in and share a couple of things to think about, and then you can share 1, 2, 3 bullet points of information. So it still looks like you're contributing. It doesn't look like you're trying to get out of work. You're still helping that meeting leader accomplish their goal. You're just not going to the meeting to do so. And then the last piece of it is to be clear that you're going to follow up afterwards. So you decided the meeting isn't a good use of your time, but again, you don't want to look like you're just shoving off work and trying to avoid going to a meeting. Instead, what you want to show is that you're engaged and that you're being proactive. So you can let the meeting leader know, I'll follow up with you after the meeting and see if there was any next steps I should be informed of, or see if there's anything else that I need to know that comes out of that meeting. And I'm happy to take any tasks that get assigned to me during that meeting, since I can't be there. So if you need to assign anything to me, let me know and I will just follow up with you after. And then set a reminder on your calendar so that a couple hours after the meeting or the next day, you send that person an email and say, hey, sorry again for missing that meeting. Was there anything important that I should be aware of? Was there any next steps or tasks that got assigned to me? And you're demonstrating that you can actually be responsible without having to go to the meeting, that you can still be part of the team, part of the conversation, without having to be in the meeting itself.
Yeah, that's huge. I think the follow-up email really goes far if you're not able to attend, because sometimes people don't attend without, maybe indicating that they're not coming. And then so when they don't attend and they also don't follow up, it just seems like they're just trying to dodge the meeting for no good reason.
Exactly. And it's important for meeting leaders to know who's coming and who needs to be engaged. And also that if you don't want to be invited to a meeting, you have to be proactive and let them know that it's not a good use of your time. And you don't have to be rude about it. But I had a team leader who told me once that he didn't like his team meetings, that he didn't feel like they were very engaging. He just kind of felt like people weren't really, nobody was really having fun with them. And so I said, well, why are you having them? And he was like, I don't know. I feel like I should have them. I was like, okay, well, you feel like you should have a team meeting every week, but they're not fun and nobody seems to want to come. So do you think that's a good way to invest in your team and a good use of everyone's time? Like, what do you think other people are thinking when they're sitting in that meeting if you're not even having a good time and you're not even finding it productive and you're the one calling the meeting? And I've also talked to people who are participants in those kinds of weekly meetings. And one woman in particular recently, I was coaching her and I said, she was like, I hate our team meetings. I don't know why we have them. I really don't know why I'm invited because I'm only a tangential member of this team. I'm not even like a full team member because I'm split between 2 different departments. And I said, well, why don't you ask the team leader, why he invites you every time, why you need to be there if you don't feel like it's good use of time. And her response was, oh, I could never do that. I could never say to them, I don't want to go to this meeting. Then I'm not being a team player. Then I'm basically saying that I don't want to be part of this team. He's inviting me clearly because I'm a part of this team and I need to be there. I'm like, you don't need to make those kinds of assumptions. Like, it's okay to question. You got to figure out the right way to do it given your boss or the team leader or the person calling the meeting. But it's okay to question. If we don't ever speak up and say, hey, we've been having these meetings for a lot of times and I'm curious what you are hoping to get out of them. I'm curious why you invited me and how I can bring more value and how I can help you make this meeting more successful. If you don't ever question, we're never gonna get better at meetings.
Exactly. Yeah, I really liked your some of the tips you gave, and one of them you said to ask what value they would like you to bring, or what perspective. And I think that is a really good way of framing that question to maybe seem less, if you're concerned about coming off rude or whatever. I think that's a really good way just to frame it in a different way that makes them know that you're wanting to help them and be a part of this, but you need to know what it is that you're supposed to be bringing to the table.
Exactly. Anytime you can frame something as how can I help you be successful, it's golden in all aspects of work, not just in meetings, right? But this is your meeting. What do you want to accomplish? How can I help you accomplish that goal? That's a great perspective that works to, figure out if you really should be in a meeting and help the person figure out if they really need you in that meeting. And the more people realize that when you show up to a meeting, you are ready to engage and you are prepared and you are invested in the success of that meeting, the better your meetings are going to be. And it becomes easier to get out of meetings where you're not going to be productive because people don't want to waste your time. No one's calling a meeting intentionally to waste someone's time, right? And as a meeting leader, you want to get the most out of the meeting too. That's typically why you're having a meeting, is because you want to get something done and you think a meeting is a good way to do it. So you want to grow as your meeting leader too, and helping people realize that meetings can be better, that they're not a necessary evil, and that there's the right people and not the right people to invite to a meeting. Those are all just things that we have to make more common in our office spaces or in our teams.
Exactly. This kind of perfectly leads into our next question. And this is something that I think is really important for the meeting leader or boss or whoever when they call a meeting. We talked about how to respectfully decline a meeting. Well, this is boss can take the mentality here to maybe not put your employees in a position where they're needing to decline meetings if you make good decisions about when to have a meeting. So this next question is, what are some alternatives to meetings?
Yes. So alternatives to meetings. So the first is when information is going to be one way, right? If I just need to present information, if I just need to share information outward, there was a change in a policy, this is what happened last week, this is my plan for next week, I'm just giving you information, you definitely don't need a meeting. That is really good shared either by email or by creating some sort of report or a dashboard or a 2-pager or whatever you might call it. Package the information in whatever way is the clearest and the best way to convey it, and then send it out. So share it by email, post it on your company website, internal website, in a chat channel, wherever people are going to access it. Now, the pushback I always hear about this is, well, yeah, but then people don't read it. I'll send them like the 2-page dashboard or the report on in the last 30 days and nobody reads it. So I need people to read this information. I need them to know it. And I know at least if I have a meeting, then everyone has to hear it. Well, the truth is that one, just because you say it in a meeting, it doesn't actually mean that people hear it. Many times if a meeting is just one way, people check out. Right? You're in your head, you're on your device, especially if it's a virtual conversation, people aren't paying attention. So just because you say it in a meeting does not guarantee that they're actually hearing it.
Yeah, and exactly if it's something that could be like written down, I always assume that if they're having a meeting about some type of policy change, I'm going to get some type of follow-up email or something because it's going to need to be in writing. So I'm like, I don't need to listen because I'm going to get this later anyway.
Exactly. So let's dispel that myth that just because it's said in a meeting or shared in a meeting that everybody heard it and has internalized it. So if you're going to send a dashboard or a report or a policy update or something like that, and you want to make sure that people read it, what I suggest is to schedule a, whoops, your slides are flipping, to schedule
Okay.
There we go. Is to schedule a check-in with each of the people that you need to have read that material. So this is, bear with me for the math challenged people. I'm not a huge math person myself, but I'm going to do a little math for y'all. If I have a meeting and there are going to be 10 people in my meeting, then that means that I'm going to spend an hour with those 9 other people or 10 other people, and we're not going to basically get, what is that, 10 people, 6 minutes per person if everybody gets to share equally and we use all of our time super efficiently. So I'll get 6 minutes of each person's brain share, but they had to spend an hour in the meeting. So that's not really a good use of their time. If they can only talk for 6 minutes, but they spent 60 minutes in the meeting. So if you send them a piece of material, I, as the team leader, could do a 5-minute check-in with each person to say, I'm sending you this material. I'm scheduling a 5-minute check-in with you for tomorrow. I want to make sure that you don't have any, I want to answer any of your questions and see if you have any feedback on it or if anything is unclear. So now I've sent the email out to my 10 people. I've scheduled 5-minute check-ins with each of those 10 people. Now I'm still spending an hour of my time as the team leader to make sure everybody's read it. But each of those 10 people are only spending 5 minutes with me. They're maybe spending 5 minutes reading the material and 5 minutes with me asking or answering questions. So they've spent a total now of 10 minutes instead of an hour. A much better use of their time. They only had to spend 10 minutes on that instead of an entire hour. So if you're worried about people, again, reading the material, schedule a 5-minute check-in. And literally, it can be 5 minutes. It doesn't need to be a half-an-hour conversation. It can be super efficient. You pick up the phone or you schedule time and you walk to their desk and say, hey, so I sent that 2-pager over. I want to see what questions you have. What was unclear? And if they tell you, oh, actually, I didn't read it. Okay, great. Why don't you take a minute to read it now? I'll wait here. You go ahead and read it, and then I'll answer any of your questions, right? Again, 5 minutes, and then you say, great, glad you got this all cleared up. If you have any future questions, please let me know. Done. So that's alternative number 1.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Alternative number 2, you mentioned Google Docs is a great way for your team to collaborate even real time on a meeting. We love collaboration tools like that. So if you need feedback on content, if you need input on some questions, but you don't need the people necessarily to be bouncing off of each other and sharing ideas off each other, put it in a material and put it online for people to leave comments or add suggestions. Using Google Docs is a really good tool. If it's graphic, you can use Envision app, but you put it online and then you send it out to everyone and say, hey, I have this report that I need feedback on. Can you please leave questions, comments, suggested edits by this date? And you give people whatever it might be, 3 days, 5 days, a week, and send a reminder email. If you go in and you don't see that anyone's doing it, you are like, oh my gosh, I've asked all these people for feedback and no one's doing it, then send a reminder email, send individual emails to each person and say, hey, I really need you to put some information in here. I really need your feedback. It's really important for me that I get that whatever it is from you. Can you please go on? It'll only take you 10 minutes. And you get them to leave those comments on the shared material. Again, much better and much more efficient than pulling everyone together for an hour to talk through and, oh, can you change this line here? Or that statistic isn't right, or maybe a graphic should go there, or could we try changing the color? That kind of stuff is not productive to do in a meeting, but it's great to do in an online document. And then the last alternative is to use a chat tool like Slack or Microsoft Teams or the many other ones, Jabber, Yammer, something like that. There's a whole bunch. So email is great for sending out some kind of content, but sometimes you need to have kind of quick back and forth. And so a chat tool is a great alternative to a meeting because you can post a question and it's kind of like, hey guys, what do we need to wrap up this quarter, or to, I need some information on X, Y, or Z for this project or this client or something like that. And you post the question, and then people can just pop in when they have a chance over the course of the day to share their input or whatever it might be. And you can have a little bit of that back and forth because everyone in that chat room can see what's going on. So it's not quite the same as doing a one-on-one check-in, but you get that little bit of back and forth between people, but it doesn't require everyone to be together in the same room at the same time. And sometimes that's actually the biggest challenge, is just aligning schedules and getting everyone to show up for that 30 minutes. But if you spread it out and say, well, Mamie can weigh in at 9 a.m. and Bo can weigh in at 2 p.m. and that's fine. We don't need it to be everybody together. We can kind of spread it out through the course of the day. And then by the end of the day, I have what I need. I've gotten that decision made, or I've gotten that input, or I've gotten that material finished. So those are the three alternatives that we suggest. Again, kind of using.
And the chat tool, I think, is also really, and something, I guess, in any of the tools to think about when you're deciding to have a meeting or not is the type of team members you have. Because if you have a lot of people who tend to be introverted and they won't share their ideas in a meeting setting, they would probably be a lot, tend to actually share their information if it's over technology. And so it's, something to consider when you think about your teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Engaging people, especially if you've got introverts versus extroverts, is one way to get people to share more, is not having to do it kind of out loud, but they can type it into a document or they can put it into a chat. Also, if you have people across the world, you mentioned your team is global. It can be really hard when someone's, up at midnight for a meeting. That's probably not their best brain power at that moment. And you have somebody else for whom it's, 2 in the afternoon and they're got the lunch coma going on. And then you've got somebody else who's, at 7:30 in the morning and they've got their kids running out the door in the background, right? So sometimes finding a way to get everyone together isn't ideal. And it's actually better to use a tool like chat where people can weigh in over time when it works for them.
Yeah, that's great. I'm actually really interested in looking into something like that myself now, because we do have such a hard time getting people all to be able to, attend a meeting when they're all over the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. And so the next question, we kind of touched on this already, but what are a few strategies that people can easily implement to ensure their meetings are productive? So if you have any extra tips or anything that you'd like to share to help people keep their meetings on track, it'd be awesome to hear from you.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about 2 strategies. The first I already mentioned, which is to have a desired outcome. So I'm not going to go back into that, but that's number 1 thing, is to know exactly why you're having that meeting and what you want to accomplish. The number 2 thing is at the end of the meeting to do a wrap up and say, what did we actually accomplish here? Be really, really, really clear and precise. What decision did we make? What are the next steps? Who's going to do what by when? Those are the best 2 things you can possibly do. If you're having a conversation and you say something like, okay, it sounds like we made a decision on that, or great, that's a good next step. We should follow up with Bill about that. Who is this we that's going to do a follow-up? You need to have a task assigned to a person. And we all hear things differently. So great, a decision has been made on this, or sounds like we've all agreed. So you probably haven't all agreed. You probably all heard something slightly different, and 3 days later, no one's going to be clear about what that decision was.
That's so true. Yeah.
So take the last 5 minutes of your meeting and just say them out loud. Here's the decision we made. We're going to move forward with this vendor. We're going to update the report to reflect X, Y, or Z. We're going to shift the date on that event to X. Whatever it is, just state the decision out loud and get agreement from everyone that that is in fact the decision you've made. And same thing with next steps. All right, so Mamie, can you be responsible for getting that information from Bill? And Bo, can you make sure that X, Y, or Z happens? And if you can put a date on it, even better. But if not, at least assign it to a person so that everybody walks out of the room having clarity about what the meeting accomplished and what the next steps are.
Yeah, those are really simple, but like they go so far just to implement those 2 steps in every meeting that you have for sure.
Yeah.
So that kind of concludes our questions. So before I get to the end of this, I wanted to ask you if there's anything else you'd like to share or anything you had to say in closing.
Yeah, thank you. So first, thank you guys for having me today. This was super fun to talk about meetings. I love meetings, so of course I'm always happy to talk about them. But know that improving your meetings is a journey. It's not a quick fix and suddenly overnight it's magic. You know, this is people, we're talking about people, we're talking about relationships, we're talking about human dynamics and behavior. So it's about taking baby steps. Start with one thing, write a desired outcome, or ask at the end of the meeting. If you're not the meeting leader, ask at the end of the meeting, hey, what are the next steps coming out of this meeting, right? You can be proactive as a meeting participant too. Just take those baby steps and over time, you will see a big change in your meetings. It doesn't have to be do everything I mentioned all at once. And it doesn't have to be really challenging and hard to get everybody excited about meetings. It's just baby steps. So tackle things one at a time. And the more you do it, the more comfortable it will get, the more it'll start to feel natural and intuitive. And you'll suddenly find yourself, declining meetings all the time. And it'll be magic. Then it'll be magic.
That's awesome. Yes, just be intentional. So I think a huge one, about your meetings, and it'll go really far.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for meeting with me today and all the listeners for viewing. I know this was really full of so much information that we can all implement starting day one. There's a lot to learn from this and take away. But if you want to dive more into it, I highly suggest going and checking out Mamie's website. I have the link listed here. And go buy her book on Amazon or on her website and dive more into these subjects if you really want to become a meeting expert yourself or really learn to lead your team in the most efficient, effective possible way. Everyone around you that you lead and work with will really appreciate it for sure. So, all right, thank you so much. I will not take up any more of your time. I'll be getting in contact with you sometime in the next few days. So thanks so much again.
Thank you.
All right, have a good one. Bye.
Bye.